All right, let's dive into one of the most intense family reunions you'll ever hear about. The story of Joseph and the brothers who, sold him into slavery. It's an incredible story about suffering, about forgiveness, and this really stunning idea that there might be a hidden divine plan at work, even when things are at their absolute worst. So, I want to kick things off with a question that really sits at the heart of this entire narrative. Just think about this for a second. What if the most painful thing that ever happened to you, the deepest betrayal you ever faced, what if it was somehow absolutely necessary for a much greater good? It's a crazy paradox, right? But it's exactly what Joseph's story forces us to look at. Okay, so let's set the scene. Joseph's brothers are in Egypt. They're bowing down to this incredibly powerful ruler who they have no idea is their brother. They're desperate for food, and he's been putting them through all these tests. But the tension, it's just hit a boiling point. I mean, for 22 years, these guys have been living with this awful secret. For that entire time, their father, Jacob, has believed his favorite son was torn apart by a wild animal. But now, Joseph is just overcome. He can't keep up the act for one more second. He orders everyone out of the room, and he gets ready to just completely shatter their reality. Can you even imagine the shock in that room? With that one sentence, bam, everything changes. The Bible says they were so stunned, so troubled, they couldn't even get a word out. The powerful Egyptian official they'd been trembling in front of was the little brother they'd thrown in a pit and sold off decades ago. But honestly, what happens next is maybe even more shocking than the reveal itself. The story immediately, and I mean immediately, pivots from this moment of human guilt and terror to a much, much bigger perspective. See, Joseph doesn't pretend what they did was okay. He states the fact, plain and simple. You sold me here. But in the very same breath, he completely reframes it. He tells them, don't be angry with yourselves. Why? Because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. He's seeing their evil act not as the final word, but as a piece of a much larger divine rescue mission. And this line right here, this is the absolute core of his whole perspective. He looks at his brothers and basically says, yeah, your intentions were evil, but you weren't the ultimate cause of my journey to Egypt. You weren't the main characters in this story. God was. He was pulling the strings the whole time. This perspective actually has a name. It's called divine providence. It's this core belief that God is in control of everything, that he can take human evil, our mistakes, even our worst betrayals, and somehow weave them into his plan for a greater good. It's an idea that gets echoed centuries later in the New Testament, in Romans 8:28, this idea that all things work together for good. So this deeply personal reconciliation, well, it's about to have massive nation-shaping consequences. Because now that Joseph's identity is out in the open, the invitation to come to Egypt isn't just for his brothers. It's for their entire family, the whole clan. Think about it. This one family reunion sets a whole nation's destiny in motion. Pharaoh is thrilled with the news, and he offers them the very best land in Egypt. Now, on the surface, that's just a smart political move. But in the bigger picture of the story, it's how God fulfills his promise to protect this family. Egypt becomes this temporary safe house, a place where the family can grow into a nation, which of course sets the stage for the epic story of the Exodus centuries down the road. Okay, but let's zoom back in on the emotional heart of this whole thing, the effect this news has on their father, Jacob, who has been drowning in grief for over 20 years. So when the brothers get home and tell him, hey dad, Joseph's alive, his reaction isn't joy. It's total disbelief. The text says his heart fainted. The news was just too good to be true. I mean, after decades of mourning, his hope had been put off for so long that his heart was literally sick with grief, and he just couldn't process the shock. But then he sees the proof. He sees the wagons that Joseph sent all the way from Egypt. And in that moment, it says, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. There's that old proverb, right? When the desire cometh, it is a tree of life. For Jacob, that hope he thought was dead and buried came rushing back to life. And it was just this overwhelming, undeniable joy. And that brings us to the grand finale, really, the big theological takeaway from this entire epic journey. This is the final settled perspective on all the pain, all the betrayal, and all the years of separation. See, as Jacob is on his way to Egypt, he stops to worship. And God speaks to him directly. He basically confirms everything. He says, "Don't be afraid. This trip to Egypt, which started because of a famine and a family crisis, it's not a detour. It's my plan. This is exactly how I'm going to fulfill my promise to make your family into a great nation." And then, years later, after Jacob has died, Joseph says these famous words to his brothers, who are terrified he's going to get revenge. This one line just perfectly sums up the entire story. It holds two huge truths at the same time: human responsibility, you intended to harm me, and divine sovereignty, but God intended it for good. Their evil act became the very tool God used to save not just their family, but countless others. And that leaves us with this final, powerful question to think about. Joseph's story seems to suggest that even in the middle of a terrible betrayal, even in profound suffering, there can be a hidden purpose at work. It really challenges us to ask, can we find meaning and even redemption, not just in spite of our hardships, but maybe, just maybe, through them?